Well, good morning and welcome to Nick Verkroost, Chief Exec of Canopy. Nick, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Great stuff. Well, listen, let's dive straight in. I've got some interesting things to ask you. So we'll start with the number of procurement solutions there are in the market. I wanted you really just to explain to anybody watching, what problem does Canopy solve and what is your ideal customer profile?
Yeah, great question. Well, so in a nutshell, Canopy is a data and automation platform, and we're really designed for small, overworked procurement teams. That's our core focus of who we tend to go after. And those are teams that typically today rely very heavily on Excel, their email inbox, and in some cases ERP as their only real window on what their supply chain does. So you can imagine they sort of live in a world where they're blind to what's actually happening. They find it very difficult to understand who their suppliers are, what they do for them, who to contact in an emergency, where they can find the contract, whether the supply is insured, all the sort of fundamental information that you need to have some assurance that, okay, we're working with people who we should be working with, who are reputable, and we understand how to manage that relationship. So the fact that they're blind from all that creates a huge number of challenges. And what compounds it is because they don't have the tools in place to support them, a lot of manual effort and energy and time is spent trying to build these pictures of visibility, which means that they're not focusing on the things they probably should be doing, which is making sourcing decisions and managing their strategic suppliers and trying to deliver the ESG commitments that they've just signed up to, and all those sort of much more important things that are going on. The day-to-day just sort of holds them back. So Canopy is here to remove all that from them. We help to eliminate all that wasted time and effort. We do that by assimilating and aggregating all of your supplier data into a single master record, and then we use that record to automate a lot of your business processes and support the management of that supplier, so you can get on and do the day job that you really need to work with. Why are we different from the rest of the market? Fundamentally, you can use Canopy out the box, so you can get value from it on day one. You don't need a lengthy implementation project or this sort of understanding that you're going to sign a contract and when won't we see some return. You can start to use Canopy straight away. So for a small team that's short on time, it really is a fantastic solution.
It sounds like there's some really kind of low barriers to usage there, which I think would be very appealing in a lot of businesses. And it sounds like your solution takes people away from putting out fires and gets them to concentrate on slightly higher value activities, really.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole focus, and that's what we're really passionate about. My background is that I've always worked in small businesses, so I've seen, the number of hats that somebody has to wear in a job role. Sadly, procurement is not a department that gets a huge amount of investment. It is sadly a little forgotten. I think obviously the pandemic and so on has shot a big light on it, but we're still sort of a little bit in the doldrums in terms of having the resource and tools and opportunity to really perform at the level that they should do. So they've had to find ways to achieve a lot with very little. And what we're trying to do is give them something incredibly simple that just alleviates all of that pain, so that when they show up on a Monday morning, they really do feel like they are achieving something and doing some good for the organization, than just being bogged down in an Excel spreadsheet, which sadly is often the case.
So what motivated you to join Canopy as CEO?
Well, it's a great question, actually. So I've always worked on the other side of procurement. So I've always been selling into organizations and sort of come up against the procurement team, during that sales cycle. And really, my motivation has come from, to be completely honest, quite a disheartening supplier experience that we constantly got subjected to, trying to sell into particularly big organizations. We would spend 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it is, selling into the commercial team, who would ultimately be the person benefiting from our technology. Eventually we get the green light from them, and then a week later we get the phone call that says, "I'm really sorry, guys. but our procurement team wants to have a word with you, and it's almost like the world sort of comes to an end at that point. And procurement haven't been party to these conversations. Clearly, in the background, no conversation has taken place, so they have no idea who we are, and we start the sales process all over again. And once you eventually get through that, you can sort of imagine the sort of the frustration that we have, sort of facing that. You then sort of get bombarded by forms from people all over the organization who you've never met before. So you'll end up with an InfoSec questionnaire from the IT team that's got 300 questions in an Excel spreadsheet. And then on the other hand, you've got the finance team who sends you a Word document where you're asked to write in your banking information and send it back to them. And you kind of think, hold on, you're interrogating me about my information security protocols, yet your finance team are perfectly fine to get me to handwrite banking information. You guys aren't talking to each other, are you? So you kind of end up in this sort of quagmire as the supplier where you don't really have much clarity of what's going on. Where am I in the process? Who should I talk to? Am I actually moving forward in this? Have you made a decision to buy, or are you just asking me for information as part of your due diligence? It's very unclear to me in terms of what's going on. And so that was a sort of a key challenge that I'd always seen and I'd always faced. And so when I met Doug, who's the founder of the business, and he started talking to us about what they were doing and some of the challenges that they've been solving through technology with some of their clients, it just made perfect sense to me. This was a very clear opportunity and a problem that I'd struggled with, it was fantastic to be able to come on board and take charge of it, and we haven't looked back since.
That's good to hear. So what were your biggest challenges when you were trying to get Canopy off the ground?
Well, to be completely honest, for all the complaining that we hear about supplier data and how terrible it is and how no one can trust ERP, and every procurement team in the land, I think, will say the same thing. It's very hard to articulate the value of clean, harmonized, trusted supplier data. And even if your procurement team understands it, they have to make an argument to their CFO, because inevitably procurement technology is not a line item in the budget. So they're having to go and fight for that. So that's always been a key challenge for us. And I'll give you a sort of example just to kind of highlight where this comes from. One of our clients, we started working with them at the beginning of this year. They are, a few hundred million in spend, a few hundred employees around the world. Grown reasonably quickly in 18 markets worldwide, just hired their first procurement person. Right. She's a team of one, wow, based out of the UK. And they didn't give her access to ERP for licensing reasons. It's just another cost. So she was reliant on a download that she got from the finance team to say, right, this is what ERP think our suppliers are. 17,000 rows of data, each one apparently a supplier. When she got introduced to us, what we quickly realized is that, hold on, ERP is duplicating the supplier in every country that you operate. Because of the way their ERP are being configured, you can't have a single record operate in multiple countries. You've got to duplicate the record every time. Right. But ERP doesn't know that they are the same supplier. So you're creating a huge amount of duplication. So now think about the administrative cost of just maintaining something like that. The CFO is never going to give the supplier access to ERP. Of course they're not. The evidence that we've had is that many procurement teams also have quite limited access to ERP. So some poor soul in the middle is faced with the unenviable task of taking banking information, probably from an email, inputting it into ERP, duplicating it for every country that you're in. If you've got more than one ERP system, suddenly the time spent, grows exponentially. It's just a phenomenal waste of valuable human resource. And, to the extent that within just 6 months, we delivered them a 3x return on their investment in the platform, just purely on that one simple thing of automating the creation and maintenance of supplier records in ERP. And that's before we kind of get into the bigger picture of, well, once you've actually got data, so we've classified, categorized, every single supplier, they've all been risk assessed. And so now I can analyze my spend through those lenses, I can get some really rich understanding in terms of, right, where is my money going, and where are there opportunities to reduce cost. We did a very simple piece of supplier concentration analysis that said, in these particular categories, they had sometimes 30 or 40 suppliers just to service one country. So you've got massive unit economics opportunities there just to consolidate and generate a return. And so as a PE-backed organization, particularly in today's funding environment, that was very attractive. But the return, as you can sort of see, is a little indirect. Once you've got the data, you can make some really powerful decisions, because you can suddenly analyze the business in a way where you can't when you're just fishing around an email for an attachment. But getting to that point and helping someone to understand the value of that when they've never been part of that environment before, they've never seen what that promised land could look like, that's always been a sort of key challenge, and something that we continue working on.
So it sounds as though in some potential customers, there's an element of they don't know what they don't know, and until you've been able to kind of cleanse the data, then they can't necessarily see that there might be some low-hanging fruit there, which will give them a pretty quick return on investment, really.
Exactly, which is partly why we have a number of our clients who come to us through referral. Some of the early clients we work with were incredibly large organizations, likes of CBRE and Caterpillar, EDF Energy, big companies. And so when people left those organizations, having been used to having a system where they've got instant access at their fingertips to all this information, they went into a company that had nothing. Immediately the phone rings and they go, I can't operate in an environment where I'm blind. I'm so used to having access. Can you please just come in and give us another system? So in that case, it works very well. When you're coming in for the first time, then obviously there's a journey to help the prospect understand, right, where is the true value here? How can we generate it? How quickly can we get to that point?
Absolutely. So just talk about your experience and your business for a second, Nick. I know Canopy isn't your first software startup. No. So what was the biggest mistake you made with previous ventures, and how have you successfully avoided that with Canopy?
Well, I'm happy to admit that I have made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not afraid to talk about them. It's one of the things I absolutely love about this startup world is this whole pay it forward, philosophy that we have, which is, I benefited hugely from free advice and help and assistance and guidance from others, who had been on the journey and done it before, when I was very early. And so this kind of idea that you just sort of give it back to everyone, unvarnished, is just a fantastic way in which this particular industry operates. If I was going to pick one, and I think this is probably one of the hardest pieces of learning that I had, through sort of bitter experience, it really all comes down to culture. And what I mean by this is we read all these fantastic stories on TechCrunch or on LinkedIn about companies raising huge funding rounds and all these success stories and all that. But underneath that sort of gloss, there are massive moments of pain in every single organization. You'd have to be incredibly lucky to start a business and not have, some colossal moment where everything just goes south on you. And in those moments where the world is apparently against you, the only way you get yourself out of that is the team. Do the team rally round, galvanize, and dig our way out of this? Or do they sort of fragment as a group of individuals? And that's the difference from what I've seen between the companies that make it and the companies that don't. Where it gets really difficult is where you may have a member of the team who doesn't fit your culture. They don't necessarily align to your core values, but they might be a senior member of the team. They may have been in the company for a long time. They might have a lot of experience or a particular skill set that you're quite reliant on. And so what I often see founders do is they try and make allowances for that within the organization, right? So they try and shield the rest of the team from some of the impact as much as possible, and it just does not work. And I've been there and I've made that mistake. It just doesn't work. So unfortunately, just taking the stand and saying, look, this person doesn't belong in our organization, you do end up building a far better business because you did that, and making sure that when you are doing your hiring, you're hiring on those cultures and values first, and then looking at everything else that individual can bring. That's the difference I see between, you know, those that make it out of a tough environment and those that, you know, just struggle to perform.
That's really interesting to hear, actually, that, you know, making culture the number one priority, you know, is such an important foundation for future success, really.
Yeah, and the challenge is what you've got to realize in a company like ours, there's always far more to do than there are people to do it, you know, and we do rely on people's initiative and interest and enthusiasm that, our CTO will go and do some cool thing in ChatGPT over his weekend and then come in on Monday and say, hey, look at this. It was on the roadmap, but we could do this. You know, that's the stuff that makes a difference for us, you know. So you want people who are that enthused. If you don't hire for that, you know, and that's just not the type of person that they are, you know, they're not interested in what you do. They're there for the paycheck, you know, those sorts of things. You know, you just never get anywhere. It just becomes a huge struggle. It's the enthusiasm and the mental interest that I think you really need to try and find in people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand. I don't think we can talk about software startups without a conversation around private equity and funding. So there's been a pretty obvious shift in the last 12 months, Nick, in terms of investors' attitudes towards software startups. And I'm just really interested in what you anticipated for the next 12 months in terms of access to that kind of funding for businesses like Canopy.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So, and I think this is where, as founders, it's really important that you understand how a fund works, you know, because if you understand how the fund works, you can then kind of understand, right, you know, how do you best get access to that capital, if that is the right funding route for you. And, you know, I should always flag that just, you know, going down the VC route is not always the right answer. You know, you have to be conscious that it is before you pursue it.
Sure.
You know, a VC, you know, any fund, they're just a custodian of somebody else's money. You know, it's not their own money that they're putting into it. This is money of their LPs. So in the same way that you as a founder have to make a return for your shareholders, the VC has to make a return for their LPs. So they're under just the same amount of pressure as you are, right? It's just a different conduit through which to get that investment. And so really what we're talking about here is LP appetite, LP confidence. And so I sort of break this down into sort of three components. If you look at the top of the market, the exit market, that's struggled for some time. I mean, we've talked, you know, for years about, you know, the underperformance of IPOs, particularly in the UK. You know, obviously Arm and Instacart IPO'd in the US quite recently and have done reasonably-ish well, but sort of heading into negative territory. You know, and Arm is a significant organization with a track record that no one could doubt. So the exit market has sort of been a bit turbulent for some time. The difference is that back then, there weren't really any other investment opportunities of particular interest for an LP who has a wide portfolio which extends far beyond just pure, you know, venture. You know, interest rates were at a historical low. The public markets weren't really going anywhere. You know, so actually, you may as well give a bit of venture a go. You know, and in the absence of something else, that's obviously fundamentally changed, right? We're in an environment where gilts are trading at nearly 5%. You know, I mean, it's one of the lowest risk, you know, investment opportunities out there. And so suddenly that changes the dynamic for the LP and how they're choosing to move their money. So that's one very important component, I think, is the lack of the exit market being there, combined with now the availability of other opportunities. I think the other piece you got to add into this is what interest rates are doing to debt. And I think that is particularly affecting the kind of buyout market, which is often an alternative route to seeing some form of a return for early shareholders. You know, we're very used to the model. You get a slug of money from a private equity firm, but then the rest is all topped up with mezzanine financing. If debt is trading now at a far higher rate than it was previously, that suddenly starts to become a very expensive way of achieving an outcome. Which means that valuations have to get depressed and performances have to look far greater than they were before. So you've got that component also feeding into the mix. And then the final piece, which I don't think we've yet seen materialize yet into the market, is there was some very, very big checks written late 21, early 22, of some very big valuations in the B2B space. And then what happened subsequently is that the B2B market, from a sort of sales and revenue generation perspective, has sort of plateaued, right? So I suspect that there are some very nervous founders right now who've made some big promises that they can't deliver, some difficult conversations at board table, and possible valuation corrections that we haven't yet seen come into the numbers, and all of that dents confidence. That's what it all does. So it's not a pretty picture. And it's not surprising that we're seeing the downturn that we have seen. It's significant in terms of the number of deals being funded and the amount of money, being put forward. That being said, the appetite for innovation and backing young businesses, innovative businesses, is absolutely still there. If you can build a business with solid fundamentals that can have the proof points, you will find funding. That is, without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm hugely confident in that. I think where we're seeing the movement is the more sort of speculative stuff around the edges, where companies hadn't quite hit those proof points, they hadn't quite got all of the fundamentals in place, but investors were sort of taking a punt because we were in this very frothy sort of environment, and that's where the downturn has come from. I absolutely believe that if you've got a good business, in a good sector where you can demonstrate growth with good fundamentals, you will definitely find sources of funding.
Oh, that's a nice optimistic way to end the answer to that question, Nick. But yeah, I agree. I understand. Obviously, private equity firms, after they've raised a fund, they have to invest it. So they have to buy businesses at some point. Of course, I'm sure the credentials have changed somewhat in the past kind of 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a challenging place for them to be, and as I said, they have a model in which they have to invest by, and that's a hard thing to break out of. So you are trying to deploy often quite a significant amount of capital in a very short space of time. So it's a difficult space for them as well, and hence you're seeing them take a lot less risk than what they used to do before.
Changing the topic slightly, you and I met for the first time at Digital Procurement World in Amsterdam a couple of weeks ago, and as you know, Nick, there was an awful lot of software vendors there, either exhibiting, presenting. I think there was over 100 in total, and it struck me as though it might be a little bit of an overwhelming experience for a CPO wandering into that exhibition hall, looking to innovate in their department, but in all honesty, not knowing where to start. What would you say to that CPO?
Well, it's a brilliant question, because I absolutely empathize with them, and I think we are sadly contributing to the fact that we're not very good at articulating what we all do. We all sort of use the same language. We all call ourselves supplier management systems, and we use this sort of terminology which is so broad that actually it's quite hard to sort of pick between us sometimes. And CPOs have gone from a world where the answer was Ariba, right? They didn't really have any other option, to a world where there's now so many logos you couldn't even fit it on a page, right? And there hasn't been a lot of education between along that journey to help them gain that understanding. And at the same time, every time they want to go and make an investment in technology, they have to have a difficult conversation with their CFO to get the budget to do so. So the pressure really is on to demonstrate a return for that. So you're sort of compounded at two different ends of the spectrum. My advice to someone who knows they need to move into this space, who has a clear problem to solve but doesn't know where to start, is just pick one problem, just one, whatever that is, one problem. It may be the highest impact problem you have. It may be the simplest problem you have to solve. It doesn't really matter what it is. Just choose one. Do your due diligence. Go out into the market. Come to events like DPW. Try and read as much as possible, and engage with some of these organizations, and get to the point where you can demonstrate a return on investment from just solving the one problem. Start really, really simple, and once you've done that, you've suddenly got a better conversation with your CFO, because they've seen the return that you've made. Makes that second budget conversation for the next piece of technology far easier. It also it's going to give you some value from already just clearing up whatever that piece of mess it was that has now been rectified, which gives you more information to inform what you do next. This is a journey. It's not a destination. This is something where you're going to constantly evolve as you move forward. I think a big part of it as well comes down to, can you find a software vendor who's going to support you on that journey? We have some experience of this, because Canopy, as you can kind of imagine, you can, if you want, achieve a huge amount with it. You can risk assess every supplier, have a contract repository. There's so much stuff within the system. But if you try and start at the very end, it just becomes too overwhelming. So we're constantly trying to pull people back and say, no, let's start really simple. You've got no visibility today. You've got an Excel spreadsheet and an email inbox. Let's just give you one step up on that ladder, which is, let's get all the suppliers in a system with their data visible so you can share it with the organization. That's step one. And now let's gradually go on that journey to get you to where you you ultimately want to be. Starting at the end, it's just such a massive problem to solve, unfortunately. I think the difficulty is you struggle to get anywhere, and you're always going to play that risk that there are so many stakeholders then involved in the decision making around it. Does the CPO actually get what they need from this project? And that's really, really important.
So just going back to Canopy for a second, I was interested to know, really looking at this from a sales point of view, what is your biggest challenge with customers, and has that changed over the last 12 months?
Well, it kind of links back to what I've just said, which is, once procurement have won the budget for one tool, right? They've gone from 0 to 1. It's a huge move, rather than going from sort of, I've got a few tools, I'm going to add another one, right? You go from 0 to 1. The risk is they now want that tool to do everything, right? Because they've got it right now. Can you sort of deliver all this other wonderful stuff for us? I think in our early days, we probably did pander a bit to that, because you're sort of hunting for the revenue. But what I've seen emerge, and you may have seen this as well, I sort of refer to them as these T-shaped technology vendors. And what I mean by that is they have an area of specialism, and that's what they're sort of known for, whether that's in risk or contract management or whatever it is. But then over time, probably through a lot of customer pressure, their roadmap has sort of trickled out along the edges to try and cover off a bunch of other things, because it's easier to try and convince the technology vendor to move their roadmap than it is to go to the CFO to buy tool number 2.
Right.
And that's part of the challenge that we see is we get that request all the time. Please, could you do this? Please, could you add this? Please, can we influence this roadmap? And obviously that's really valuable for us, as technology people, because we need to listen to our customers, understand what they're doing. But we also have to stay true to where we recognize our core discipline is, our skill set is, and where we can deliver most value. And often that is a difficult conversation. You have to let a customer down and say, we can't do that. You really need to go and find a specialism if you want to jump into that area. And so that's just a conversation that's managed. It starts in the sales process, and you kind of manage it all the way through the engagement, the life cycle with the supplier, with the customer.
That's really interesting, actually, to hear you say that, because essentially what you're saying is often it's better to look for the next customer than to try and be everything to the customer that you've already got.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the age-old adage is it's far cheaper for you to upsell an existing customer than obviously it is to go and find a new one, and that is absolutely true. But what you don't want to do is and we're a bootstrap business, right? So we don't have a vast team, so we have to be quite careful about where we prioritize development resource. Now, there's not a lot of value in us offering incredibly thin service in a sort of extremity of the system, where there are specialist tools out there who can do it far better.
Sure.
So that's where we have to remain very true to ourselves, to say, look, this is our core value. This is where we can deliver, and then I think it's around, can you, through whether it's API integration or whatever it is, start to enable that customer. We bring a number of tools together and you present a solution forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really interested in your answer to this next question, Nick, because I think it draws on one of your very early responses, and that's about length of sales cycle. You
Yeah.
referred to your solution as being, out of the box. So I'm guessing that may influence the length of time it takes you to take a conversation all the way through to contract with the customer.
Yeah,
And
well,
so,
I mean, our sales cycle isn't that long, so we're quite fortunate. But certainly we have definitely seen those cycles start to get longer.
right,
And I think that's happening everywhere. People are being much more careful with their money. I think particularly that, as we were sort of talking about before, the argument that procurement have to make to the CFO to try and fight for budget, that is getting tougher. It was already quite hard, and now the CFO is under pressure from everywhere else in the organization. I think the other piece that comes into it is that procurement is under massive pressure right now, huge pressure. And we're seeing this in the amount of time that we get to spend, both with our existing customers and also with prospects who we're talking to. This particular cycle, we're approaching year end. We've got inflation has been sort of running, off the page, and people are having to look very carefully at where they can find opportunities to reduce spend. We've seen a number of redundancy rounds within some of our customer base, which has obviously been challenging.
right.
And they're also just under massive pressure around all of the other disciplines and initiatives that have been announced. There are massive achievements to be made on the ESG front, which a CFO is desperate to talk about because they want a good news story. We're seeing a lot of activity off the back of some of the new legislation is coming in certain markets, which they're having to sort of feed in. So they haven't got the tools yet to support them with that. Ironically, we can make that far easier for them, but they don't have the time to engage in that process because they themselves are just occupied. And so it's a sort of natural extension of that sales cycle, as a result. But fundamentally, it comes down to FDs having to be much tighter in terms of where they invest their money and how they do so.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's very consistent with what we're hearing from other vendors, Nick. I'm sure that's no surprise to you.
Yeah, no, not at all. No.
Okay, I have one last question for you, and this is really looking forward. So, what would success for Canopy look like during 2024?
It's a really good question, and I mean, our mission is, we're all about the little guy. That's what we really care about. We've all come from small organizations. That's our real passion. So we're trying to find those procurement heroes and give them the opportunity to really sort of showcase themselves, and these guys, they might be on their own or they might be in a tiny team and they're just toiling away every Monday morning, giving up on life. So we want to find more of those stories. We want to hear more of those stories in the market where people have found something and it's made a massive difference to both them personally and their enjoyment of being a procurement professional, but also in terms of what they've been able to achieve their organization. That's what really matters to us. Obviously, it's about growth. Of course, it's about growth. But for us, this isn't. We really don't believe that ProcureTech should be the preserve of those with the biggest checkbooks, because sometimes I sort of feel like that's where we are. We were both at DPW, as you said. You listen to some of the other conferences. There's some fantastic conversation taking place there. The amount of knowledge and advice and education is incredible. But I sort of fear that it's only accessible to those who can afford to send someone to these events. And
Yes.
as we've just been talking about, most of these organizations don't have time. And even if they did have time, I'm not sure they could necessarily afford the ticket. And that's where we sort of come in and say, hey, look, this just doesn't make sense to us. The world that we occupy is still sitting there with Excel and email. That's our world. Some of them may not even have evolved to the point of developing sophisticated P2P systems beyond ERP. So, there is a huge opportunity there for improvement and support and helping these people to improve, what they do, both for themselves, and for what they can achieve for their organization. So that's what we want to hear. We just want to hear more of those stories out there.
Absolutely. Nick, you've given me some fantastic insights today. I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation. I hope people who are watching have enjoyed it as well, whether they're other tech vendors, CPOs, or maybe consultants in our ecosystem. But I think there's a lot of food for thought in there, a lot of positivity, and certainly I'm optimistic for 2024. I hope it's a great year for you and all the guys at Canopy. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Simon. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm glad it's been insightful for you.
Great stuff. Speak soon, Nick.
Take care. Bye-bye.